Jenkins was born in 1952 in Hickory, North Carolina. Growing up, he moved often due to his father's job in the military. After his father retired, he became an astronomer and physics professor. This began stirring a love for science in Steve.
As a child, Steve loved all animals and often had a collection of his own ranging from lizards to dogs. He loved reading and doing experiments in his miniature chemistry lab. Growing up, Steve always knew he would be a scientist, but when it came to go off to college, he chose an art school in North Carolina instead. His major was graphic design, and he had many different career picks, including one with his wife, before ever sitting down to create a children's book.
Steve and his wife, Robin Page, have 3 kids, Paige, Alec, and Jamie. After years of reading to their children every night, Steve decided he wanted to take a stab at writing children's books himself. Steve Jenkins has now written and illustrated 26 nonfiction children's books, 3 of which were done by him and his wife. He has also illustrated 16 books for other various authors. His first book was published in 1995, and he has become increasingly well-known since then.
We chose to study Steve Jenkins because of his artistic techniques. He uses cut and torn paper stacked in collage to create beautiful lifelike images of various animals. To make sure his images are accurate, he collects a variety of references. He visits zoos and aquariums to take photographs, and he also studies images from a wide array of literature. In an interview, Steve described his technique like this: I do an outline drawing based on the references and how I want them to look on the page. Then a quick color setting to figure out what paper I'm going to use in the collage. Finally, I cut and tear. His images are so unique and beautiful that they have won him many awards, including the Caldecott Honor Award.
Steve's inspiration for his books often comes from questions his children ask him. He also bases his books off his love for animals and his desire to present facts in a fun and interesting way. At the end of all his books, there are a few pages that tell the reader more information about each animal mentioned in that specific book. In an interview, Steve describes how his 2 worlds, art and science, collide and bind. I believe that there's a cultural misconception about scientists, reinforced by many books, movies, and television shows, that a scientist is cold, logical, and unable to see the forest for the trees, the opposite of the artist, who is creative and intuitive. That science is Western and dissects things, while Eastern and artistic thought are holistic, spiritual, and non-judgmental. But art and science are not mutually exclusive. I believe that understanding how things work, what they're called, and what they do increases our sense of awe and reverence. I believe we should teach science as a process tool, not just a collection of facts. It's a tool that allows children to test their own theories and to trust their own conclusions. This excerpt came from Steve Jenkins' website about how he created the book Move. Every book begins with pages, often many pages, of notes and rough sketches. It is during this part of the process that lists of possible subjects are made and modified, and we begin to explore the relationship between images and text on the book's pages. These quick, rough notes make it easy to consider lots of different approaches. At this stage, it's also relatively painless to throw out ideas that don't seem to be working. What's called a thumbnail layout of the book is next. Move is a 32-page book. We figure out what information will be included and in what order. Here's author thumbnail layout. Dozens of these are done for each book. At this point, the art and text are proceeding along 2 parallel tracks. Here are tracings from books and images downloaded from the internet of a few of the animals we considered for the book. Using these tracings, we begin to design each 2-page spread more precisely. These layouts will be trimmed, folded, and glued together. This rough version of the book is called a dummy. Creating a dummy book lets us experience the art and text in the same way that the printed book will be read. For Move, we made about a dozen different dummies. As sketches of the art and dummy books are being created, we are also working on the text of the book. I always begin writing in a notebook rather than on the computer. I find writing on the computer, at least at the beginning, makes the text seem more finished and polished than it really is. I get concerned with style and vocabulary before I've really figured out what I'm trying to say. Eventually, the notes are formalized and a manuscript is written and submitted. This copy shows our editor's comments. The editor is an important part of the process. I've worked primarily with the same editor, Margaret Ramo, at Houghton Mifflin for many years, and her questions and suggestions often make a critical difference in the form a book ultimately takes. Now it's time to begin creating the actual illustrations. Finding the right reference is important and often takes more time than making the illustration itself. I use images from the internet, sketches and observations that I make in zoos, aquariums, museums, and especially books. I like to have many different images of whatever I'm illustrating. This gives me more choices in composing my own picture. Choosing the paper that I will use for the illustration is next. These are 2 of the papers I chose for the blue whale. The top sheet includes scraps of recycled newspaper and magazines, all dyed blue. The bottom sheet, which reminded me of the grooves on the belly of the whale, is a print made from a plank of wood. Both papers come from Japan. It's important to know what papers I'll be using before I create a final sketch of the art. I don't trace reference for my final illustration. For one thing, it's often impossible to find just the right view of a subject. More importantly, the distortions and inaccuracies that creep in when something is drawn freehand give the illustration a kind of personality and energy that tracing seemed to lack. Finally, it's important to remember that an exact copy of most printed images would be copyright infringement. The final pencil sketch will become my guide for cutting out the pieces of paper that I'll collage to make the illustration. Each line of the sketch represents the edge of a piece of paper. Here's a detail of the blue whale's eye. In the same part of the actual illustration, each layer of paper is adhered to the piece below with a thin adhesive film. Here's the final blue whale illustration for Move. It's the same size as the image in the printed book.
Never Smile at a Monkey is a book about creatures, both large and small, whose dangerous nature might not be so obvious. Their teeth, claws, spines, and venom can be deadly to an unsuspecting or careless human. Steve makes sure that if you ever encounter one of these animals, you will be prepared. For every animal that is featured, a new verb is used that starts with the same letter as the animal's name. This is useful to broaden the vocabulary of our young learners in a fun and interesting way. Students will most definitely appreciate the little-known facts about these animals, which are based on fact, along with its humorous and light tone. Bees, Snails, and Peacock Tales is a book filled with poems about various animals in which interact with patterns and shapes in their natural habitats. This book is excellent for displaying the natural occurrence of geometry in the world around us, which will contribute to the students' awareness of how education can infiltrate their everyday lives. It is a fun and interesting way to introduce shapes and patterns while introducing poetry and even presenting factual information about the animals and their natural habitats.
How to Clean a Hippopotamus, a look at unusual animal partnerships, is a book about animal symbiosis. It uses multiple images per page to tell the story of how a variety of species use each other to stay healthy or survive. This book complements our theme because it teaches students how to work together. It makes very apparent that even though they are different, they can still all work together and help each other out. As future teachers, we should stress that each child will have a special role or purpose in our class, just like each animal Steve mentions does in its habitat. How Many Ways Can You Catch a Fly is a book addressing problems that many animals face in their natural habitat. The animals mentioned and many others have come up with ingenious solutions to solve their problems. This book reinforces the idea that hard work is what solves your problems. Steve teaches us that these animals have to catch their prey, hand-make their homes, and even dodge predators. This book complements our theme through teaching readers and students that all problems have a solution. The solution may involve doing something they don't like, or it might be really difficult, but ultimately, if you work long and hard enough, you can solve almost any problem if you try. I really like the lesson this book teaches, and I feel like it would be very beneficial to early readers. One of Steve Jenkins' books, The Top of the World, was recorded for an audio version and published in Braille. Everything matters. Once one is willing to do less than their best work, whether for money or just to get something done and gone, the work loses not just its integrity, but its rewards. So I try to make sure I meet my own expectations of professionality, even if I could do less and no one would notice.